Welcome to the third episode of our Biography Series. Our guest in this episode is Maria Salomea Sklodowska, a marvelous woman. Most of you know her by the French-influenced version of her name and her husband's surname, which she adopted after marriage, Marie Curie. Her story is one of perseverance. It is a tale of both poverty and wealth, pain and success, the fusion of women and science, and the struggle against gender discrimination. Marie is such a woman that it is inevitable for all humanity to be inspired by her. The woman of firsts. She is the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, to have a doctorate in Europe, to lecture at the University of Paris, and to hold the title of professor at the same university. She is also the only woman to have received the Nobel Prize in 2 different fields. And she did all this at the beginning of the 20th century, in a period when gender discrimination was rife, when women were thought to know and understand nothing, and when they were considered to exist only to ensure the continuity of the human generation. But how? Here is the story of the woman who died for science. It is the 1870s. Little Polish Marie lived a modest life with her family in Russian-occupied Warsaw. She learned to read at a very young age, even before her older sister. Marie experienced her first deep pain when her mother, who had given up her job as a school administrator to care for her children, died of tuberculosis. Despite all the difficulties, she was a very successful student. She graduated at the top of her high school class and was awarded a gold medal for this achievement. Marie wanted to get a higher education, but in those years, women were forbidden from attending university in her country. In addition, the Russian authorities had fired her father for his opinions, so she could not afford to study abroad. So she and her sister made a plan. Marie would first work for her sister to study in France and send her money. After she finished her studies, her sister would do the same for her. So Marie sent her sister to university and worked for 7 years, both sending money to her sister and saving money for herself. At that time, women's rights seemed like a fairy tale. It was impossible to see women in universities, and women earned 4 times less than men, even if they did the same job. In 1891, when her older sister graduated, it was Marie's turn, now 24 years old. She took the train from Warsaw to Paris. Wanting to start her scientific studies immediately, Marie enrolled in the Faculty of Science at the Sorbonne University. But poverty haunted her. She spent most days on bread and tea, on the verge of starvation. She lived in poverty in the attic she rented in a student neighborhood, could not even buy firewood for herself to save money, and sometimes shivered from the cold. She worked as a spotter in laboratories and sometimes washed bottles to keep up with school. She endured these harsh conditions for 2 years, yet poverty could not break her resilience. Upon graduating, she took the physics master's exam and placed first. A year later, she began her master's degree in mathematics. Marie spent most of her time in the laboratory, where she met the man who would become her husband, Pierre Curie. Until then, Pierre had little success with women and held prejudices against them. He believed that truly gifted women were extremely rare and that ordinary women were merely obstacles to scientists. But Marie completely changed his perspective. In 1895, they combined not only their scientific work, but also their lives in marriage. Maria Sklodowska had now become Marie Curie. This young husband and wife shared a deep interest in radioactivity. Marie's doctoral advisor, Henri Becquerel, discovered that uranium spontaneously emitted mysterious rays, similar to X-rays, which could interact with photographic film. This phenomenon was later named radioactivity. Soon after, Curie discovered that thorium emitted a similar radiation. More importantly, she found that the intensity of this radiation was unaffected by physical or chemical changes and depended solely on the amount of the element. This led Marie to a groundbreaking conclusion. The source of radiation must be something fundamental within the atom itself. This radical idea challenged the prevailing belief that atoms were indivisible. Then, by focusing on a super-radioactive ore called uranium oxide, the Curies realized that uranium alone could not create all the radiation. In their experiments, they detected much higher than normal radiation in the uranium ore. When they accounted for all the components of the substance, there was only 1,000th of a part that they didn't know what it was. But how could it be? If such intense radiation came from just a tiny fraction of the material, could it be a new, highly radioactive element? What you are about to watch reveals the immense challenges behind the discoveries we often describe in just a few words. In the history of science, this is one of the most difficult journeys ever undertaken. We usually say things like, "This scientist discovered this," or "That scientist invented that," as if it were simple. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Found, discovered. But now we will see the sacrifices, pain, tears, patience, and intelligence that lie behind those groundbreaking discoveries and inventions. The Curies immediately started their work. Since uranium ore was expensive and only available from Austria, they could only afford the residual waste left after uranium extraction, believing that the unknown element resided within it. The Austrian government agreed to send the material if the Curies covered the transportation costs. The Curies needed a laboratory to do their work. When they submitted their request to the university, they were only allocated a makeshift shack with a leaky ceiling, cold in winter and sweltering in summer. At this point, the most exhausting and grueling research in the history of science began. They began by boiling and purifying the residue in huge cauldrons on the stove. The melt was constantly stirred and filtered. As the gas emitted indoors was often unbearably dense, the boilers were moved to the open courtyard, weather permitting. For 2 years, they boiled, filtered, and purified tons of uranium ore shoots, all the while ignoring their health. Moreover, the scientific world was unaware of how radioactivity harms human health. Finally, they obtained a small amount of bismuth alloy. Considering that this alloy was 300 times more radioactive than uranium, even this was no small feat. In 1898, after discovering the radioactive properties of thorium, Marie announced that they had found the element polonium, named after her country. But the problem was not yet completely solved, because after the polonium was removed, they found that the remaining dregs were much stronger. They continued their work, but they couldn't find a way to separate the remaining radium from barium in a single process. They only managed to isolate barium in very, very small amounts. In theory, once barium was completely removed, only radium would remain. For 2 years, they tried to separate barium from radium using crystallization, working with thousands of small containers. Finally, they reached the last crystallization process, where all that remained was the fully purified substance, the final thing left from thousands of evaporation containers. The historic moment had arrived. The result of refining 8 tons of uranium ore and 4 years of work was now inside this tiny dish. Within a few hours, the water inside the dish would evaporate, leaving behind only pure radium.
I think I feel like crying.
Hours passed. But what was that? There was nothing left of the evaporated water. Only a trace, a stain, was left.
There's nothing there.
Years of work, labor,
Not a trace of
patience,
anything.
sweat, and tears had
The
been
grain.
replaced by a funny stain on the bottom of a porcelain plate. Marie was devastated. She could not recover for days. She tried to understand how they had come to such a result. Where was the radium? Where had the source of that high radioactivity disappeared? Days later, she remembered the trace on that plate. Could it be that what they expected to find was not even a pinch of salt? Perhaps the radium remaining from the 8 tons of uranium ore was so small that it could not even be seen with the eye. They immediately went back to their laboratory. It was the middle of the night. And here is what they saw. Yes, what they saw was radium of immense beauty. The Curies realized that radium had such strong radioactivity that the stain on the plate, which looked like nothing, was actually the element radium, which is 1,000,000 times more radioactive than uranium. That is precisely why it was very, very rare. Marie and Pierre Curie, along with Henri Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903 for their research on radioactivity. In the same year, Marie Curie became the first woman to receive a doctorate in the advanced field of science. The idea of using radium for the treatment of malignant tissues also began to be discussed and even applied in those years. While the Nobel Prize made the Curies globally renowned, it also provided them with financial relief, allowing them to pay off their debts. The Curie couple continued to teach and conduct their experiments. However, their exposure to extreme radiation, particularly affecting their hands and arms, began to cause injuries. Yet, they continued their work without giving up. Despite their tremendous efforts to benefit humanity, they rejected the various monetary offers made to them and did not take out a patent for radium. They could have made a fortune with just a gram of their discovery, but they didn't. And Marie even asked in astonishment, "Radium is an element. It belongs to everyone. How could it belong to just one person?" These words were a resistance by a scientist against commodification and capitalism. They were a testament to the idea that material gain was incompatible with the spirit of science. In 1906, an unexpected accident separated this devoted couple. Pierre Curie was killed after being run over by a horse-drawn carriage. This was the greatest devastation of Marie's life, but she had to continue. She took over her husband's position at the Sorbonne and, despite all the criticism, became the first woman professor at the Sorbonne. In 1911, she received her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for the discovery and research of polonium and radium and for proving that one element could transform into another. She became the first person in history to receive Nobel Prizes in two different fields. Today, she is one of the few people who have been awarded two Nobel Prizes. Marie Curie, who continued to work on radium until her death, paid a heavy price for the benefits she brought to humanity. On July 4, 1934, she passed away from leukemia in Savoy, as her body had been severely exposed to radiation, with nearly every organ damaged. This is why she is referred to as the woman who died for science. Some of the tools she used in her laboratory can be seen today at the Marie Curie Museum in Warsaw, but the notebook she kept, which she never parted with, is kept in a special safe in France due to its radiation. If you wanted to take a look at her manuscripts, you would need to wear protective clothing and sign a waiver to avoid radioactive contamination. Madame Curie's body was buried in a lead-lined coffin to prevent the radiation, which caused her death, from leaking out. Marie Curie's groundbreaking work laid the foundation for our understanding of physics and chemistry. She revolutionized fields such as oncology, technology, medicine, nuclear physics, and many others. Her discoveries in radiation unveiled some of science's greatest secrets and marked the beginning of a new era. The only person whom fame cannot corrupt were words spoken by Einstein about Marie Curie. Indeed, she was. She didn't wear makeup unless she had to. She didn't wear much jewelry and didn't care about her clothing. She only had a black lace overgown to wear at official ceremonies. She avoided pomp and formality and was embarrassed when praised. In fact, an American journalist who came to their door once met Marie Curie in the garden but could not recognize the scientist who looked neglected. Madame Curie kindly treated the journalist who mistook her for a maid. The journalist later realized that he had made a big blunder and never forgot Curie's words. Madame Curie has only one message for those who come to see her. Be less curious about people and more curious about ideas.
Madame Curie.
Look for the clear light of truth. Look for unknown, new roads. Even when man's sight is keener far than now, divine wonder will never fail him. Every age has its own dreams. Leave then the dreams of yesterday. You take the torch of knowledge and build the palace of the future.